Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Purple Kurt podcast. It has been a minute since I've said that, about 4 months, but I'm back for the attack. With me is none other than the world's greatest saxophone player.
Oh, now let's not start there.
I know. I'm just so the world's greatest saxophone player in my universe at this very moment in time, and that's Mr. Eric Leeds.
You need to expand your universe,
including picking up where we left off from last time. And before I forget to ask, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm okay. The baseball gods are not smiling on me at the moment.
They're not smiling on you. They are they were smiling on the Phillies down here, and my hometown, the Orioles, were. Well, they're not smiling on them either. They were doing pretty well. They're at the 100 games in a row that they clinched the AL East. But what's your take on who's going to make it, do you think?
Well, it's still a crapshoot. I mean, the main problem with me right now is it doesn't look like my Dodgers are. That's why I'm the gods are not smiling on my Dodgers right now.
Or the Yankees, right? Because you're also a Yankees fan.
Yankees they were dead in the water a long time ago. So I've buried them and gotten them, on the next year or the year after that or whenever.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm kind of assuming that Texas will complete their victory over Baltimore.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced about my hometown Twinkies. They won the other day, but their game starts 3:00 this afternoon. I still am giving Houston the edge in that series.
Yeah.
I think Houston, Texas could be a good series only because they're rivals.
Right.
And in the same division.
Right.
Texas is rough right now. They're grinding it out. That looks like a pretty good team. I'm really hoping that Atlanta wins that series only because you see I'm an old school baseball guy when it comes to the legitimacy of the postseason. And nowadays the postseason has very little relevance to the regular season. It's just a crapshoot of a tournament.
Yeah.
And this may sound like sour grapes, but I don't think the Dodgers and Arizona should even have to be playing each other right now, any more than I think Atlanta and Philadelphia should be playing each other. Because here are two division winners, Atlanta in the National League East, Dodgers in the National League West, and they're playing the second place teams in those divisions. That contest was already decided in the regular season. Yeah. So all of a sudden you've got this, the way it just arbitrarily sometimes matches up, that a second place team in the same division now has the opportunity to beat the team that won their division. And I'm sorry, the old school baseball, guru in me or whatever says that's not legitimate because those contests have already been decided. At least in the American League, say Minnesota and Houston, you've got two legitimate division winners going after each other. But all of these extra wild cards, I mean, it can make for some fun baseball games, but it kind of makes the whole regular season irrelevant because what are you fighting for? Only to have enough, to win enough to get into the postseason. Winning the division no longer seems to mean anything. And, there have been some other people that have been pointing that out because these situations have been happening more and more often in the postseason. Bob Costas calling the Dodger game the other night brought that up. He said, here we have another situation where a division winner might get knocked off by the second place team in that division. And he said, it's something that, in many people's opinion, Major League Baseball needs to address. What will come of it, I don't know. But anyway, now, having said that, the Dodgers have not played good baseball the last two games. So, they still need to figure out how to win some games in the postseason. And that
so all these extra games, basically, they're just trying to sell tickets and put butts in these stadiums.
Absolutely, trying to get as many different markets into the postseason to try to ramp up, as much money as they can.
Well, they're trying to make it like a more of a football model too. Now, I'm not the world's foremost expert on baseball, but all these instant replays and the way that they're phrasing the offense and the defense on the baseball field and what have you, it's just kind of.
No, the game and just the quality of and the way the game is played, in my opinion, and a lot of other people, has gone downhill because of the analytics and all of this stuff.
Oh my God, yes.
So anyway, you want a 2-hour podcast on that? I'll that's for another
on baseball alone, I know.
Yeah. So that's basically my long answer to how am I doing today. Physically, I'm okay. Baseball wise, not so good. So we can move on.
But you can root for the home team anyway. I mean,
Oh no, absolutely. I'd love it if the Twins got in it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So
maybe not necessarily driving downtown and dealing with all the.
Yeah. No, it's. I'm very comfortable sitting in front of my TV and watching the games.
Oh, believe me. What they're charging for tickets for baseball and football. Anyway, a friend of mine's had an opportunity to go to see the Eagles and the Giants game. He's like, why do I want to see the Giants lose for $500? I could sit at home and do the same thing, spend that money on drinks and food.
Yeah. Now, I basically look at it this way. Back in the day, in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was still living in Pittsburgh and living in Atlanta for years, and I was going to games all the time. And back then, I could get a field level box seat, primo box seat for $7 or $7.50. That's what it was. Now, in today's dollars, that would roughly be maybe $35 to $40. So I kind of look at, if I can't get a field level box seat for about 35 or $40, sorry, I'm staying home.
I don't. So, you're not getting that to park. You're paying that to park in the goddamn lot.
Exactly.
You're paying that to park in the lot.
Yeah. And for me, unless I have a really good seat in the stadium, I'm going to get much more of an idea of what's going on in the game sitting at home in front of the TV. So there you go. Yeah.
So let me ask you, how was your summer? I know the last time I left off, you were slated to play with the Minneapolis Funk All-Stars when they were in town.
Did that. That was actually in, was it April or May?
Yeah, it was end of April, wasn't it?
Yeah. Did the gig. That was fun. Every once in a while, maybe I'll go and do that. It's just kind of revisiting all the stuff that I've done before. So, to be absolutely honest with it, there's nothing really musically that I'm going to get out of the gig that's of any great, nothing new. It was a fun hang with friends, and that was why.
Hey, I get it. As always, you just keep it.
Yeah. And Paul knows me well enough they played the other night, and Paul knows better than to ask me, but maybe once every year or so, hey, do you feel like coming doing a gig? He said, maybe catch me next time or whatever. So
okay.
Yeah.
Just so you guys can hang and catch up with what you're doing.
Absolutely. And we do really want to do some more recording, maybe do another CD with our LP music group, our LP project. So
we would love to hear that. And as I know, that's an out-of-pocket thing that you're doing, or crowdfunding. So
yeah, exactly. So it's a matter of and just finding the time to get the people together in the right place and see how we can pull it off. But it's we continue to make that something we plan to do.
You've got I know you've got some grooves and some ideas that you probably
Oh, I've got a stack of music that goes back 20 or 30 years. And the nice thing about this kind of music is the kind of music that I might have written 25 or 30 years ago doesn't really have a shelf life.
No,
it's not like what's the current vibe this week in pop music. That's not what LP music is about. So yeah.
There's not going to be an AI version of your music. What could be, I guess.
Well, a more intelligent version, but that's on us.
No, we would love to hear you guys do some more stuff, because No Words, again, I revisited that not too long ago. And, the nice thing about that idiom is that I always hear something different, or I always pick up something different,
Well, I appreciate that, because that's basically why I can still listen to Miles Davis from the 1960s and still, hear something differently, even if it's something that I know what's coming. sometimes just the fact that I react to it in a way that maybe I never reacted to it before. It's always, to me, the music that I like to make and the music that so much that I like to listen to so much, why jazz means so much to me is it's the best of it is an open book that as many times as I listen to a singular recording, it's still not closed. It's still something that's an open, something else to be gotten from it. So,
well, let me ask you. So your routine, because as a horn player, do you still have to keep your chops wet? I mean, is there a routine that you go to, a warm up that you go through when you are getting ready to play a gig, or even just compose?
My warm up is that basically I play the horn every day at home.
Okay.
Yeah, for at least an hour and a half, sometimes 2.5 hours every day.
Wow.
Yeah. And at my age, that's kind of critical. It used to be 20, 30, even maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, if I were to lay off the horn, go on a vacation or something, lay off the horn for a couple of weeks, and I could come back and with maybe a day that, I could get back into it. Now, not so much. If I haven't played the horn in a few days, I know it. Getting back into it is like, so I'm and the other thing is, I enjoy it. It's just really the thing that I enjoy, sitting at home and playing. And with everything that I can do as a saxophone player or music or whatever, there is still so much that I can find out and enjoy. I can pull out exercise books that I struggled with in college, and I'm still struggling with them now. But it's, I can still get an enjoyment out of just sitting for an hour and running through exercises, classical works and classical exercises.
Sure.
I've got.
Let's take a look here. Ooh.
And there's a book of cello sonatas and cello pieces that were transcribed specifically for saxophone.
That's really cool.
And they're amazing. And the thing is that when you really get into somebody like Bach, you realize in some respects how little music has changed over the hundreds of years since he was writing music.
Yep.
The cadences and just the melodic architecture of his music back, 400 years ago. Nothing much has really changed. I'm playing shit on playing through Bach, and I said, well, wow. I mean, this is a line that I could be playing on a Charlie Parker song. I mean,
can you imagine those two? Well, in heaven, if one does believe that, I mean, can you imagine the two of them collaborating?
Well, Parker, Parker was very much into classical music and listened to all kinds of music. So I mean, all of it, it's, and as someone one pointed out, if you're playing a note, like if you're playing a C in a James Brown, a C in a James Brown song is the same C in a Beethoven symphony played by the New York Philharmonic. The note is the same. Yep. They're all the same notes. It's just what are you going to do with them? So, anyway.
So that book that you had, is that a Hal Leonard book? That Bach.
No, this one is by Advance Music. That's the publisher.
And who did the arrangements for the?
Well, it's transcribed by a guy named Trent Kynaston. It's Kynaston. His name is spelled Kynaston, and it's published by Advance Music. And it's just J.S. Bach's 6 suites for violin, cello, transcribed and edited for saxophone.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, you're for the people who are, you're looking at all those notes, all those fancy notes. So
yeah.
And I love stuff like that, because basically, while there is a certain architecture and a certain, every instrumentalist has their own devices, certain ways of just approaching things. If I'm playing a basic solo in a jazz song or whatever, there's a certain architecture that has basically been mined, that's developed over the 40 or 50 years that I've been playing this music. And after a while, your fingers just kind of go where you know they're going to go. And when you're playing music that's written, you don't have the luxury of just saying, hey, my fingers are going to go where they go. When you're playing written music, you got to make your fingers go where the music is telling you to go. And with with Bach and a lot of these classical exercises and classical repertoire that I'm playing, you can't make the shit up. So basically, you don't have the luxury. So what it forces me is it increases, hopefully over a period of time, my vocabulary, because it's forcing my fingers and my thought process to go in a different place. And after, the goal is that this increases the options that you might develop over the years. So where 20 or 30 years ago, where my fingers are going to go automatically, now I've got a wider range of options is where my fingers may want to go automatically.
Yeah.
I don't have just one exit or exit ramp or entrance ramp. I've got several now. And that's what those books kind of help increase. And because the best moments for me, and I'm sure a lot of other, particularly jazz musicians and improvising musicians, is can you get into a situation where you're surprising yourself? And that's the greatest thing that can happen to me. If I'm playing something, whether I'm playing it or particularly upon, listening to a playback of a recording, and I can sit there and I say, wow, I didn't expect me to do that.
Cool.
And if I can, to the degree that it's possible for me to have, to be detached from what it is that I'm doing, sometimes to be able to just get myself out of myself and try to look, try to listen with the ears other than my own, if I, and said, wow, that's something that I know it's me, but where did that come from?
Sure.
Those are the most wonderful, and I can't, I'd love to say they happen every day. They don't.
No.
But the point is, if they happened every day, then once again, that would just become the normality. And the whole point is to get beyond my own normality.
Right.
So, yeah.
To stretch yourself. And it keeps the brain active. I mean, we know that the brain's,
absolutely,
synapses, when you perform, read, or music, you're firing all different parts of the brain. And that's what's going to keep you going.
Yeah. And just, going through, another thing to do is just go through the standard songbook of the Great American Songbook and pull out songs by Gershwin, by Cole Porter, by Jerome Kern, by Rodgers and Hammerstein, all of the standards that were so much a part, and come across songs that I haven't played and songs that have particular harmonic properties and changes that, maybe a little different for me, or said, well, here's something, Cole Porter particularly. I mean, of all of the great American composers, he has a melodic and harmonic sense that really was pretty out there in some regards, and the way his melodies link to the harmonic progressions, even songs of his that might have a more standardized harmonic progression, but his melodic lines are really sometimes very, very, very odd. I mean, they sound great, but once you really get into it, I said, damn,
analyze them harmonically.
This really, and it's like, boy, I got to think about this in a different way. So
I have a question.
Sure. Go ahead, sure.
Camille.
For both, I mean, for both of you guys, actually, because when it comes to like being both musicians, would you guys agree that, the spaces between the notes and when you're playing it are and taking your time and allowing the music to breathe, the spaces are just as groovy and as funky as the notes themselves, so the less is more kind of factor. Do you?
Absolutely. Even if you're playing fast lines, diatonic fast lines that we all love to do, but there is that almost sometimes unnoticeable you know, the manner in which you literally link one note to the next, even if there's not really a space, there has to be some sense of air,
Yeah.
you know? But to your point more, you know, certainly stylistically, there have always been those players that, like you say, do with less is more. If you're looking at the, in the context of R&B and funk, that aspect of it.
Yep.
What was so significant about Maceo Parker was the fact that he really plays very few notes. And his whole thing was to apply almost an entirely, you know, the priority with Maceo was always about the rhythm and about the rhythmic syncopation of the notes. Because Maceo actually, he's as close to playing the saxophone as a drum as anybody I've ever heard. Now, there are other players that have implied that. The great King Curtis kind of did that, who was kind of you know, in the 60s, King Curtis as a saxophone player was what like David Sanborn was in the 80s, as far as like, there was so much of the R&B music that was recorded, you know, released in the 60s. If there was a saxophone, 9 out of 10 times it was going to be King Curtis. I mean, he was that essential to so many recordings, aside from the, you know, the music of his own. He had that kind of, was hinting at that style. Yeah. Maceo kind of took it to the next level.
Yeah.
I'm more of a diatonic player in that my, you know, I am more of a, I play more notes, but my sense of time and where I sit in relationship to the groove, that is entirely based on the same place that Maceo Parker learned his time. And that was from cats like Fathead Newman and Ray Charles's music. Mm-hmm. And also, a lot of the cats that were in the great James Brown band of the 60s, which was the band that set the template for everything that came after that in R&B and funk music. A lot, the band and the musicians that were the heroes to those guys were guys like Count Basie's band. Mm-hmm. You know, in fact, it was no coincidence that when Fred Wesley, the great trombone player, who was the band leader for James Brown, the late 60s and early 70s, when he left James Brown's band, he got a gig with Count Basie because that was his biggest hero in music, you know. Wow. Wayman Reed was a trumpet player that was with James Brown's band for several years in the 60s. He went on to play with Count Basie, you know. So there's that link back there, because if you're gonna listen in jazz and find the closest thing that you could get to James Brown's band, I would say it was Count Basie's band, what was known as the Count Basie Atomic Band, from like the late 50s to the, you know, into the 60s. So there's that linkage there. But basically, to Camille's point, yeah, there is always that. The Sonny Rollins, and no one plays more notes at times than Sonny Rollins, but basically, you know, he would say that your time comes from what happens between the notes. Like I say, even if the notes are coming fast and close together, there has to be that separation, you know, that articulation and that air that's there. Yeah.
And to the shortest way I could, I mean, Eric, you always give a master class. This is why you need a podcast.
My brother and I might actually break down sometime and do one together.
Good.
Which could be a real.
Oh, dude, I'd study it. I'd re-listen to it 100 times. But the shortest way that I could put it, and again, if I was talking about reading an opera score or classical score, currently I'm working on a piece that was a contemporary of Bach's, not very well known, Jan Dismas Zelenka.
Okay.
He's a Bohemian Bach, but his cadences and stuff aren't exactly like Bach's. The language and vocabulary is there, but his rhythm approach is very different from how, and cadentially is very different from how Bach would have done it.
How do you spell his last name?
Mass. We're doing Zelenka's Mass, It's a great piece, but it don't go where you think it's going to go because you're like, oh, this guy's a contemporary Bach. It's going to go this way.
Yeah.
Wrong. His rhythms are very different. So the way that he treats sounds and silences are what defines his style versus how Bach treats his sound. And you talk about somebody who writes a million notes. I mean, Jesus Christ, Bach. I mean,
oh yeah.
As you can attest to, Eric, you looking through his stuff. I mean, you know, when you sing Baroque music, Handel, which comes later, but I mean, he's a contemporary of Bach's, but it comes a little later. Bach, Handel, and composers of that time, singers were not given necessarily a cushion to sing over like you would later on in romantic and post-romantic music, where the line, you know, of the singer had this pillow.
Yeah.
It was equal opportunity. You were an instrumentalist. You weren't treated as a singer.
As a singer, right?
Later on, where there's more line.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, we could get into a whole. This is why I love to.
Well, it's one thing, you know, in these Bach cello, you know, things that I have in this book, because there's no space and there's no room to take a breath. Basically, the book tells you at first when you're going through these that you have, as a saxophone player or wind player, you have to stop somewhere and breathe, where a cello player does not have to do that. So basically, if it's actually, you know, these exercises, it's basically playing them to a musical point and then basically stopping, taking a breath, and then continuing. So yeah, it's a different discipline.
Oh, completely. Now, when you ask that question, Camille, and you brought up Maceo, Eric. I mean, obviously with, you know, Maceo playing with James Brown for so many years, there was a song that he does on the One Night Alone live album with Maceo taking a solo where he goes, there's a little pause and you can feel it even though Maceo doesn't play it. He's such in sync with the drummer. I think it would be John Blackwell at that time.
Blackwell on that,
right? And you knew there was a palpable sense that you could feel Maceo's awareness of the silences when he made the sounds. It was such a percussive, and that's what makes that funk, and that's what makes him such a brilliant rhythmic player.
Absolutely. There's another thing that
silence is just as important as that sound that he makes.
Yeah, there's another thing that's part of Maceo's architecture, is that instead of just coming to an abrupt stop with a phrase in the spaces, a lot of times he'll throw in these extemporaneous little ghost notes that are almost like punctuation marks. And some of those are some of the absolute hippest things in a Maceo Parker solo, is just these little, you know, like, and they'll be just like the, you know, just some little thing that, and you sit there and I said, well, was that a question mark? Was that a comma? Was that a quotation? Was that just a period or whatever? It's just like, I'm done with it, but like, you know, see ya, bat.
I think of, when you mentioned ghost notes, Eric, I thought of Mark Brown, Mark, who I hope is doing well, because I know he's been ill for quite a little while here. He was demonstrating Prince's bass technique on 777-9311 of the time, and how his playing.
That's hard.
How you, you know the time very well. You've worked and done some stuff with them, Camille, and video and audio, and the ghost notes are so important to making that song work. And I've talked to Ricky, Ricky Smith, Free Smith, who plays with Morris Day in the time, and those ghost notes are critical and crucial, just as much. And it's not a silence, but it's a rhythmic punctuation.
It's almost like when he made it, and that on the hi-hat, it almost sounds like it's a mistake. It's one of those, like,
it's a drum machine pre-program.
Well, yeah, he did everything on the drum machine, but when you
Yeah.
when you recreate it acoustically, it's so
when
hard.
Jelly Bean has to recreate it, yeah.
Yeah, or even I think her name was Hannah for the New Power Generation, but and in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 and 16, or maybe it was different, but she was on YouTube explaining like that it's even difficult for her to to recreate because you know the human body you can't, you know, Prince did everything on the drum machine on that song, so it's like for the percussion, and it's
Yeah.
she's like it's one of those things that you go, all right, here we go. You know, because and it's kind of testy, it tests you, but I mean that's the fun part. She likes it, and I always thought that beat was just insane. I mean, and she's like, it's one of those beats that you know, acoustically you go, I don't know, it sounds like a mistake, but it makes you think and question and you know, hiccups.
It's not a
There's
mistake,
like a hiccup.
That's what Clyde Stubblefield did every night with James Brown.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And you got to know these guys when you were a wee lad. I just, I mean, I just think of the fact that you sat at the knee, you know, watching these guys from the side of the stage, Eric, and all the James Brown stories you probably have.
Well, the most wonderful thing about it is that this is while they were inventing it, which made it all the more special because, you know, when you go back to that time, nobody, nobody was playing music like that.
Nope.
I mean, really, I mean, it wasn't just, you know, it wasn't just, and you know, say the same thing about the crucial periods of all the jazz cats, you know, Miles and you know, when Weather Report came together, I would say for the first 4 or 5, maybe 6 Weather Report albums, you weren't just getting a new Weather Report album. You were getting an album of music, the likes of which you'd never heard before. And then, you know, sooner or later, everything becomes defined. And by, you know, by maybe the 5th or 6th Weather Report album, you said, okay, I get it. I get kind of what they're able to do with this. And some of the, you know, most of the rest of the albums were great albums. There's some absolutely great shit. But it's those first ones where something is so new. And I suspect it's, you know, it's exactly how the cats felt in the 1940s when they were hanging out on 52nd Street in New York. And you know, it was like a gauntlet. You could cross the little street. There was one club, their club, and everything. Charlie Parker's in that one. You know, Monk is in that club. Dizzy's in that club. And you're going between them. Everyone, you're hearing music that is being created in a manner, and you realize, you know, you're at the birth of you know, every night something is being added to the vocabulary. And you know, for me, I am, you know, every young generation that's listening to the music, everything is going to be new to them.
Yep.
But it doesn't really change the fact that the vocabulary of all this music was pretty much completed by the early 1980s. You know, if you really listen to what's going on in pop music, or even jazz, but pop music today, there really is substantively very little difference in what's happening today and what was happening in 1985. Whereas if you could listen to music that was, you know, being played in 1975 and go back 30 years from that, you know, you're talking 1945. Now, obviously, the technology of recording made, you know, had a huge impact on how are you going to listen to the music. But there was a significant difference between the music that we were listening to growing up and the music that my parents listened to. Whereas today, the parents and grandparents of kids today, the music they were listening to 20 or 30 years ago really is pretty much the same.
Yeah. I listen to a lot of current hits today, Eric, to your point, and a lot of the cadences are right out of 50s rock and roll.
Well,
I mean, it's not played in that style, but the chord changes are 1, 4, 5, 7, 1, or 6 thrown in there just for good measure.
The technology of the instruments, the different sounds, and the samplers, of course, you know, certainly is a factor. But when you basically get down to the nuts and bolts, rhythm, melody, harmony, and structure, what is there to do now that hasn't been done? And the answer is nothing. There are no new rhythms. There are no new melodies. There, structurally, somebody can come up with a cool little beat, but basically, I'm sorry, even 7/7 9/3/11, you could take that whole concept. I would take that and I'll play you Max Roach playing a hi-hat in 1950, and you're going to swear that's 7/7 7 93/11.
Cool. Ooh, I want an example of that. So we'll talk. I want to know what Max Roach.
I've seen Max Roach in gigs where in the middle of a gig, he would get from behind his drum kit and he would take his hi-hat and the stool and he would walk to the front of the stage and just with his hi-hat and sit down, and for 10 minutes, he would just play any and everything he could play just off of the hi-hat.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to talk, sample that, and you don't need a Lin machine.
Yeah, he is a walking Lin. Now, did Buddy Rich take that from Max Roach? Because I know he used to take a penny. I know Buddy Rich used to take a penny underneath his two fingers and do all kinds of tricks.
Well, Buddy Rich was a freak.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't a great drummer that I know that doesn't give Buddy Rich his props.
Yeah.
As being just one of the most masterful
it's a beast.
Manipulators of the instrument that is a drum set.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get in and I mean, Buddy Rich played with Charlie Parker and all those guys too. Mm-hmm. So I mean, he had his bebop, credentials.
Mm-hmm.
It generally then gets down to personal taste. Yeah. I wouldn't say Buddy Rich was an innovator to the extent that a Max Roach or a Kenny Clark or even an Art Blakey was, but he was one of the greatest practitioners of playing the drums in progressive instrumental music.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to give Buddy Rich his props. That cat was ridiculous.
You ever encounter him?
No, not personally. Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody in my generation has encountered him because everybody has heard the bus tapes, and his reputation, and we all probably know somebody that was maybe in one of his bands for like, even if only for 2 nights before they got fired or something.
I mean, he makes any of us look like a choir boy with his mouth. I know.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Hey, let's, so I'm looking at the things left unasked aspects of our conversation last time. So, Eddie Palmieri.
Yeah.
Why is he your favorite? I mean, I know you could espouse greatly, but Eddie Palmieri, I mean, I got Sentido on vinyl, actually. I mean, you can download everything, like I said last time, music's tap water now with all these different streaming outlets. Yeah. But I wanted that one on vinyl.
Yeah.
And Sentido was a great album. And thanks for the recommendation on that too. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's first of all, it just goes back to, for whatever reason, and no one ever knows where you're growing up or whatever, and you're exposed to different kind of music.
Yeah.
What resonates with you, why something resonates with you and something else doesn't. Why do I like baseball and I don't give a damn about football or basketball or any other thing? Right. I don't know why. All I know is I do, so I run with it.
Yeah.
But all of the music that I was listening to as a kid, getting into rock and roll, was Little Richard, Chuck Berry, but finally getting into Ray Charles and stuff like that. Somewhere along the line, I must have heard music that was what later would be called salsa, but Latin, just music of mambos, rumbas, music from Cuba, Puerto Rico. And for whatever reason, the rhythmic and the harmonic components of this music resonated with me, even like I was 8 or 9 years old. If I would hear something that was like that, even if it was like listening to the freaking theme song to I Love Lucy, but that whole thing, that whole vibe, I said, wow, what is that? And so over a period of time, Richie Valens, La 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 Bamba, as a corny kind of piece, but yet there was something. I said, well, that's different. That's just a little bit, what is that about that rhythm and that particular harmonic component? So over the years, it just, with both myself and my brother, Alan, we, over a period of time, just started falling in love with Afro-Cuban, Latin jazz, and there were, Ray Charles would do things that had a Latin flavor to it.
Sure did.
He used to do a song in his set with this band called Frenesy, which was kind of a Latin standard. And it was just, it had that component. Well, it's R&B, but yet that's something different, the rhythmic thing and the harmony. The great conguero, Ray Barretto, who was one of the great masters of the music, band leader, he had a freak of a #1 hit, a song called El Watusi.
Oh.
That became the #1 selling single in the country. And I'm trying to think what year this was. It was probably around 61, 60, somewhere around there. And, you know, it was one of those things that came and went. It was just a huge phenomenon. But it was like, okay, there's something more to this music than just that.
Yeah.
So Alan and I, we would start getting into guys like Mongo Santamaria, the jazz flutist, Herbie Mann, had great Latin jazz bands in the early 60s. So we got into that. And finally it leads to this artist and this artist and this artist. And finally we get to Eddie Palmieri. And we start to realize and learning what this music is, that, oh my God, here is, you know, in the genre of that music, I would consider Eddie Palmieri to be the Duke Ellington, Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, and James Brown of that music all in one.
Yep.
And as we learned about him and his history and realized that this truly was somebody that was one of the most innovative and incredibly creative conceptualists in this music, but also as a band leader, his bands literally were like the James Brown Parliament Funkadelic of that music. There is, funny thing is that when you really understand where this music came from, essentially from Cuba, but the diaspora of Cubans and other peoples in the Caribbean, it went next to Puerto Rico. And from both Cuba and Puerto Rico, it came to the United States. And in the immediate post-war years, there was the large immigration of Puerto Ricans to New York City. And then it got in the urban, milieu of all that. A lot of these players were also into jazz because they were now integrating all of the stuff that was happening in bebop and all that stuff. And it became something else again. But it was always dance music. No matter how complex the rhythms and the harmonies and the soloists were, it was still about the groove. And there is an aspect of the music that is basically called the son montuno.
Yep.
I don't know what the actual English translation is for the word montuno, but in musical terms, it's real simple. It's the vamp.
Yep. Yeah.
The whole thing about James Brown and funk and everything was basically not devolving, but basically prioritizing the rhythmic aspect of everything. Not only the rhythm section, but the horns, everything became about the rhythm. And in James Brown's thing, basically it was the old song forms now don't matter. Because basically when you listen to a lot of James Brown stuff, well, there's no song there. It's just a groove. Because basically James Brown, he said, well, maybe we'll do a song, but we really just want to use the song to get to the vamp, get to the freaking groove, because that's where we're going to sit, and this is where we're going to pound that shit into the ground. And after a while, James Brown said, well, you know something? The hell with the song. Let's just start with the groove.
I'll tell you, in my world, to piggyback on that, Eric, I'm in a Led Zeppelin covers band, and we very much pay attention, as did the guys in Led Zeppelin, especially John Bonham and John Paul Jones. were very much into the 70s funk and would incorporate that into songs like Trampled Underfoot. You know, particularly taking the clavinet parts from Stevie Wonder's Superstition. That's what inspired John Paul Jones. But there are parts to, we do a version of Immigrant Song where there's very much a vamp that we improvise other bits of their songs and other blues songs in other songs that we do. And it's the same concept. I consider some of their songs like Chocolate Chip Cookies. There's a dough that's holding the song together, but the dough is just to get to the chocolate chips, which is the vamp.
Right.
It's the dough doesn't matter. It's the chocolate.
Well, basically in salsa, what became later, you know, the marketing term was salsa. Eddie Palmieri always had a comment about that. He said, "I don't like to characterize my music as a condiment." It was this way, you know, but that's what we're stuck with. So it became known as salsa. So,
and he's very much with us and still performing actively.
Not at the moment. He's been off the road for a while.
Okay.
And I'm a little concerned. I mean, he's in his mid-80s.
Well, yeah. I mean, he was in the last, I'd say, couple year, 2 years ago, year or so.
Oh, yeah, up until about 6 months ago.
Oh, but really?
And my brother Alan is very close with him, and Eddie Jr., Eddie's son, and Eddie has been taking some time off. So at his age. Yeah, exactly.
I really wish I had been able to see him when he was in Princeton, New Jersey, playing.
Yeah.
But,
well, I tell you, the last time I saw him was about 2 years ago. He came in town. It was 2.5 years ago, maybe, and I played with him. Sat in, you know, asked me to sit in with him, which I did for both sets. And I got to tell you, it's like, to the degree that this music over the years, and look, there's so much else about this music. Ray Barretto's band, you know, Larry Harlow's band. There are a lot of other bands that were, you know, but there is a malevolence to the groove that Eddie and his band can lay down. That is just on another level.
Yeah.
You know, just to the difference that when James Brown at his best or Parliament Funkadelic at their best, they're, you know, great bands that play, but you know, there's a reason why we give all the props and everything to George Clinton and that band is like, if you're talking about funk in the 70s, that's the benchmark, just like it was James Brown. But in Afro-Cuban music, for me, it has always been Eddie Palmieri. And the fascinating thing about him is that all of the other musicians and musical heroes of mine, once they become defined and once they become older, it's basically about performing just because that's all they know how to do.
Right.
And basically, you know, I had no interest in seeing James Brown the last 10 or 15 years of his life. Because there was nothing, you know, it was kind of sad for me. He said, okay, I understand why people still get off on it. But, you know, I knew him when he was
at his peak.
Right. Eddie Palmieri never got like that. He always had young bands. Eddie could come and play a song that I know he has been playing for over 40 years. And I could sit there and he'll groove that song like he never played it, like this was the first time he had ever played it. And it was absolutely amazing how he could keep that. And he could fool me every time. I know that song, 50 years old, but damn, you know, and I've heard that song 1,000 times. Yeah. But damn, he's playing it like he just wrote it today.
Because he's got the musicians that are giving him the exchange of energies that keep it vital, that revitalize it for him.
Absolutely. Right. And of all the music that resonated with me, the one music that I always kind of had a question mark is to whether I had the ability to really play this kind of music with any kind of a legitimacy. I'm, you know, obviously, you know, every music has a culture that is responsible for its creation. the specific aspect of this music, salsa, was this music coming out of Cuba, going to Puerto Rico, and then we, coming to fruition in the Bronx,
yeah,
and in Spanish Harlem,
oof,
and communities like that.
yeah,
I'm a white kid born and brought up in Milwaukee, Richmond, Virginia, Pittsburgh.
yep,
My mother's family is Swedish. My father's family is Jewish from New York.
yeah,
But what the hell do I know about any experience
yeah,
of anybody who is responsible for this music, other than the fact, for whatever reason, I loved to listen to it.
yeah,
So the first time that I found myself in the situation where I'd gotten to know Eddie Palmieri and actually sat in with him,
yeah.
my brother has a picture of me on stage in a club, with Eddie. And the picture is Eddie is at the piano, and I'm kind of standing there in the frame, and I'm kind of looking at him. And, if you put a cartoon bubble, it would be like my thinking. I said, how the fuck did I get here? So over the years, whenever the situation that I'd run into, Eddie would almost always ask me to sit in with him.
Yeah.
So just the basic idea that this guy is going to allow me to play his music on the stage with him basically speaks for itself. Like, okay, I guess I can do this.
Wow.
But it's not. So in that regard, so okay, it's what we do. So that's just the fact that he's asking me to do this is all the compliment that I really need. But
you've played in quite a few, Latin ensembles though, locally.
Oh yeah. But this last time I played with Eddie a couple of years ago, afterwards, of course, I thanked him. I said, man, as always, Eddie, thank you so much for, and he looked at me, he said, Eric, he said, wherever I happen to be playing, wherever that might be, if you're where I am playing, you must consider the stage that I'm playing on your home.
Wow.
And you know something? I might just put that on my tombstone.
Right.
Because for, someone who means so much to me, to just be, and some, and you stop thinking about, well, that's nice. But for whatever reason, at that point, I just sat there and I said, all right, I'm going to have to think about this one for a minute, but that's, yeah.
So if you had to go out on the road and go on tour, and he said, and he was up to it and said, hey, Eric, I want you to come out on tour with me for a couple of shows.
If the logistics are, yeah,
right,
hell yeah,
you would make it work.
I mean, basically, if I had ever made the decision to relocate to New York and live there, I would have been a member of, I would be playing, I would have gotten into Eddie's band somehow, and just been, that would have been one of my, that's it. There is no music that has the combination of all of the components of music that I love in the particular combination that Afro-Cuban music has, for whatever reason. Obviously, there are other artists and other music that mean as much to me as that. But I can think of no music that I can listen to that puts a smile on my face and brings me the level of joy that music, in particular, Eddie Palmieri does. And a big part of it, too, is the person that Eddie is.
Yeah.
He is one of those individuals that basically, like you say, wants to live life to its fullest. He is not a glass half empty kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
For him, the glass is overflowing and it's infectious. And he is an absolute wonderful raconteur. I mean, if you could ever do a podcast with Eddie Palmieri, I can guarantee you it would be a podcast the likes of which you would never done. The guy has stories, and he's one of those guys that even if you know nothing about him or what he is talking about, he can bring you into it, and you will be, at the end of it, you will say, wow, I'm glad I got to listen to him. He is absolutely just fabulous. And his sense of humor is just, oh my God, he is one of the funniest. Yeah, just tremendous.
I would love to talk to him if he's up to it, but who better to facilitate an interview with him than you?
I could, I could,
I mean,
I could ask my brother to reach out to his son, who is his manager,
yeah.
Eddie Palmieri Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is any interest, or if he's up to it, maybe it could happen. I'll ask Alan. You know, all he can do is just send a message, you know, to Eddie Jr. Say, hey, maybe, you know, give a link to, or you know, give a background. He could check you out or whatever. And who knows, maybe he'd be up to it. No.
Maybe I could have the two of you together.
Oh well.
That would be.
Believe no, you really don't need anyone else.
Okay.
All you really want is Eddie. Yeah. Yeah.
But you have this insight. Okay. No, I would love to, because his music is very infectious. That Sentito album, and I've listened to other stuff that he's done.
Well, the guy, you know, the guy put his first band together in the early '60s. The band was called La Perfecta, and it was a groundbreaking band in its instrumentation, because there was a form of the music that was very popular in the early '60s that was called charanga. And basically what a charanga band is violins, two or three violin players that are playing in tight harmony, that are playing actually the montuno grooves that could be played on a piano, you know, da 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 da, you know, in the harmony, triad harmony of violins, with usually a piccolo or a flute as the primary soloing instrument over that. Well, Eddie Palmieri took that idea, but he, instead of doing it violins, he did it with two trombones. Okay. And he called the music trombanga. So this was the first concept that he had for his band La Perfecta. And it turned everything upside down, because it took the sonority of the violins, but obviously two trombones are going to give you a little more of a power than violins did. And it became...
But trombones. I mean, you have to have really good trombonists with the intonation.
You had a guy who was named Barry Rogers,
who
was a white guy, but he was one of the great Afro-Cuban, you know, Latin jazz trombone players. Barry Rogers, years later, formed a band that was called Dreams. That was like a Blood, Sweat, and Tears Chicago kind of band. That only existed for 2 albums worth in the early '70s. The other horn players were Randy and Michael Brecker. The drummer was Billy Cobham.
The bass player
was it was the first time I ever heard Michael Brecker with this band. They did 2 albums for Columbia. The bass player was Will Lee. The guitar player was John Abercrombie. The drummer was Billy Cobham. And the horn section were Barry Rogers, Randy Brecker, and Michael Brecker. The band was called Dreams.
Cobham, I mean, that's a super group in itself.
Yeah. The problem is the band was 20 times better than the music. The music wasn't that great. Unfortunately, none of them were really great writers in that at that. But Barry Rogers basically put this band together. Barry Rogers, you know, he passed away years ago, but Barry Rogers is like an icon for so many musicians and trombone players, brass players, for so many years. But he was the musical director with Eddie. He's on Sentito. I mean, he's like the arranger for a lot of that stuff. So anyway, and then after Sentito, Eddie just continued to evolve in this music. His next album was called The Son of Latin Music. Then there was Palo Parumba, Unfinished Masterpiece, on and on. I mean, anyway, the full discography at Eddie Palmieri album-wise, there are probably 40 or 50 albums by now over the years. So yeah.
Oof. I listen. I would love. Gosh, I hope he takes time to rest out and does another show, or who knows.
I do too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I hope he's well.
Now,
and
the other thing
is, let me know how that all works out.
Go on YouTube, because I mean there are tons of gigs on YouTube also.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And you said 6 months it's been since he's been out in the road.
I think it's been probably close to 6, maybe 4 or 5 or something, but at least since the spring. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to throw another name out at you. Ray Charles.
Well, Ray Charles was my I can't prove a negative. I can't say if things had happened differently why I would or perhaps would or wouldn't have chosen to pursue music as a career. But when I chose to decide by the time I was in high school that I was going to, pursue music as a career and go to music school, I look back at it and I said, it was probably because of Ray Charles.
Wow.
Having grown, my entrance into the music was Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, all of those cats.
Yeah.
But when my brother brought home Ray Charles, What I Say probably was the first record that we got it, and then got into that. Before on the pop music side, before there was James Brown, there was Ray Charles.
Yep.
But because Ray Charles was also so heavily into jazz, that really was kind of my entrance into jazz, because there was so much of the jazz side of Ray Charles that also resonated with me, that it said, okay, what is this about? And from there, I'm getting into Cannonball Adderley, I'm getting into Monk, getting into Herbie Mann, I'm getting into all the big bands, Count Basie, and it all just is an onslaught of everything. And you realize after a while, is that, oh, well, as a musician, this is where I want to, this is why I want to play the horn. And of course, the saxophone player that was to Ray Charles at that point, what Maceo Parker was to James Brown years later, was the tenor saxophonist David Fathead Newman.
Yep.
And that's why I play the horn. It was that he was the first saxophone player that when I was in 5th grade, it was like, wow, maybe it'd be fun to try to play that. But more than anything else, it was Fathead Newman. And to this day, he is still, to me, one of the most beautiful sounds in all of music is the sound that he got out of his tenor saxophone. He's a tremendous alto player also, but he came from Texas. He came from, I believe it's from Houston. Either Dallas, I'm pretty sure Houston. He played with a style that was then known as a Texas tenor player. He was a blues player. I mean, he's a jazz player, but he was just one of the consummate blues players. And to this day, it's just one of the most wonderful sounds in music. Just one of the, but from then on, it's then into everything else. So Ray Charles was really kind of the germ, the platform by which everything else that I eventually learned, got into as music started there.
Cool.
Yeah. He was like my musical stem cell.
Wow. That's quite an honor to be that. While you were talking about that, I looked up Corsicana, Texas. Where the hell that is, near Waco. It's 56 miles northeast of Waco. But so out in the sticks here.
Right. Yeah.
But the Texas tenor. Okay, cool.
Yeah. In fact,
like that.
Fathead's first albums were produced by Ray Charles on Atlantic Records in the late 50s. And I, had worn those albums out. And years ago, probably about 10, 15, 20 years ago, when I was in Japan, I think when I was in Japan, one of the runs of gigs I did with Sheila E. when we had our E-Train band together, I found Japanese, 180 gram pressings of Fathead's first 2 albums that I bought. And probably about 15, maybe 15, or could be even 20, probably about 15 years ago, Fathead was in town in Minneapolis playing. And I went to see him. He was in town for a couple of nights. And I took the albums with me for him to sign. They are the only 2 records that I have ever taken to an artist to sign. Because I basically said, Mr. Newman, said, maybe you've heard it from other people, but, I have to blame you for everything that's happened to me as a musician. And he was an absolute sweetheart of a guy, just a wonderful guy to sit and chat with. So anyway, I have him sign those, but like I said, that was my guy.
How long ago did he play that you saw him, Eric?
Pardon me?
How long ago was it that you saw him play?
I want to say it was
15?
Somewhere between 15 to 20 years. I mean,
Yeah, I'd say,
passed a year, passed away probably over 10
2009.
years ago. Okay, yeah, yeah. Now here's an odd bit of the saxophone section that he was in the classic Ray Charles small group in the late 50s. He was the tenor player. Hank Crawford was the alto player. The baritone player was a guy named Leroy Hogg Cooper, who was also a big influence on me as a kid. It's one of the reasons I wanted to play baritone. They all died within about a month of each other.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, which is crazy, which is freaking crazy. But that saxophone section, those three were one of the greatest saxophone sections I've ever in my life heard.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
What about like Polly? Would you ever get a signature from Polly? Paul Peterson.
we have each other's signature every CD that we try to sell. I like Paulie's signature best on the check that he writes me when I do a gig with him.
When you guys sell CDs, you could be like, we could make money. You can pay us to not sign the CDs, or you can pay us to sign the CDs, or whatever one you want. Either way.
That's what we do. Absolutely.
When they sell LP music, and here, I'll shamelessly plug this once again.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's still available on eBay.
And
15 bucks unsigned, $25 signed. So there you go.
Which is really, come on.
That's messed up. Oh my God.
But to not, you look at sports stars signing their stuff. You're looking at no less than $150.
Oh yeah. No,
I mean, forget about it. Yeah. I have a picture signed portrait of Johnny Unitas, one of the greatest football quarterbacks of all time. Yeah. And from his restaurant when I was 7 years old, the Golden Arm Lounge, and I don't think we paid 150, 200, whatever to get it signed. He was just happy to sign it.
Yeah. Well, maybe if I'll tell you if how I could really, I'll know if I'm really successful if I can sell the autograph without the record.
There you go.
So let's just cut to the
sell it digitally. Sell it as an.
What do they call them?
NFTs.
Fungible tokens or whatever.
Oh God, whatever.
Yeah. Well, you heard what Sean or Jay-Z, he went up to every single adult that wanted his signature. It was recently on whatever YouTube or the news or I don't even know. Yeah. And he's like, no, but every kid that wants a signature, I'll sign yours, but it has to be for you permanently because personally, because people are actually selling and reselling these signatures. Right. So it's really weird. Yeah. I got a random question.
Sure.
For Eric. When you had the audition or heard that you were going to have an audition, did you go in a warehouse and have the audition and not know who you were going to be playing with when the family was being prepared? Or, I mean, was it just the weirdest thing ever? Or
there was no audition.
There was no audition at all.
I went into a recording session. What basically happened is my brother Alan had been working with Prince for over a year. Yeah. And when the time broke up, and Prince apparently wanted to keep a side project going, yep. That he could produce, like The Time. And then he came up with the idea of the family. He actually did ask, I believe he asked Jesse Johnson if Jesse wanted to be in this new project. And Jesse said, no, I'm out of here. I'm done. Mm-hmm. I'm gone. So he basically said to Paul Peterson, who was the keyboard player in The Time at that point, he looked at Paul and said, I'm going to put a new band together with whomever wants to stay. And Paul, you're going to be the lead singer. And Paul said, oh, really? Okay. Jelly Bean decided to stay. So somewhere along this process, Prince had mentioned to whomever, including my brother, that, I think I'm going to include a saxophone in this music that I'm going to write for this band. I was living in Atlanta at the time. I had moved to Atlanta about a year before from Pittsburgh.
Recovering from all your bar band years.
Really? Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And Alan called and said, Alan, of course, told Prince, they said, do you have anyone in mind yet? I mean, have you made a decision about who you might want? And apparently Prince said no, or whatever. And Alan said, well, I know somebody who plays that might be good for this gig. So apparently, long story short, Alan gave Prince something of mine to listen to. Probably a cassette of one of my bands, from years before. I'm not even sure if Alan remembers what it might have been. Alan called and said, Prince wants you to come up and he's got some songs done. He wants you to come up and play on them. My initial response is, oh, yeah, so.
What?
Yeah.
You see, I understand something. I'm not a fan of Prince's music. I never was. I wasn't then. I'm not now. I mean, there is some stuff of Prince's music that I like.
Like, what about Mutiny?
It's Sex Machine. It's James Brown's Sex Machine. That's all it is. Anyway, to answer your question specific, Prince had 4 or 5 songs already done that he had played everything. He played everything on them. I came up to play on these songs. I did not meet Paul Peterson or Jelly Bean or anybody until after this recording session.
Yep.
All I knew is that it took Alan over a week, close to 2 weeks, to talk me in to even wanting to come up and do it. Because I said, the music of Prince's that I was aware of, there was nothing really about his music that really did much for me. I liked the song 1999. That was about it, Yeah. I dug that, but anyway, finally I'm sitting there and I said, geez, what is wrong with me? It's a recording situation. I have no expectations or illusions about what's going to happen. All I know is he's asking me to come up and play on these songs, and he's going to pay me for it. So something, they're going to fly me up. The other incentive was, coincidentally, my mother was from St. Paul. Mm-hmm. And I have cousins and my aunt and uncle that lived in the Twin Cities that I used to visit when I was a kid in the 60s. And it was like, I haven't seen my Aunt Margie and my Uncle Goody and my cousin Kenny and Gary and Ann, or whatever, was still living in. I haven't seen them in almost 15 years. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go up to Minneapolis. I'm going to hang with my brother I haven't seen in a while. I'll hang with him and his girlfriend, later became his wife, Gwen. Mm-hmm. I'll hang with them. I'm going to spend some time with my family. And oh, yeah, I'll do this recording session and he'll pay me for that. And that'll finance me being able to just sit in Minneapolis for a few weeks and hang out with my family. Mm-hmm. That's why I came up and did it. So I fly up on a Sunday evening. The next Monday afternoon, I go into the studio at a warehouse, because that's Prince Paisley Park was not, even started then. There was a warehouse that he used for recording and rehearsals. I came in. Alan introduced me to Prince. Prince looked at me and he said, would you like to, I could give you a cassette of the tracks that I have done, and you could listen to them for maybe a day or so and come back in, and then we could do it. And my answer to that, I didn't want to do that, because I didn't want to have homework. I didn't want to have any responsibility other than, I'm here, I'm ready to go. If you're willing to go, I'm ready to go. And Prince smiled and said, let's hit it. An hour and a half later, we had High Fashion, Mutiny, Desire, mm-hmm. and the song that was called, the instrumental that was called Susanna's Pajamas. Yeah. Those were the 4 songs that he had done at that time.
And that was the first sessions you ever did. This is pre-Madhouse, any of that stuff.
Oh, yeah. And now it's Prince and his engineer, Susan Rogers, sitting at the console. I'm standing at a mic with my headphones on. just playing along to these tracks. But I mean, this is music that was like high fashion and mutiny. I've been playing music like that for 15 years. So there, you know, there was nothing about Susanna's Pajamas was just like a little fusiony, you know, jazz fusion, little funk thing. And all he wanted me to do was just solo on it. So it was like, all right, you know.
You weren't starstruck by Prince. I think, Camille, for him, he grew up knowing James Brown personally since he was 13, 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So you are James Brown, and generationally, you are, you know, at least a decade older than Prince, roughly.
Pretty much so, yeah.
And
6, 7 years. Yeah,
your Prince was James Brown, so you were more starstruck by that because you got to watch the height of James Brown's prowess on the side of the stage and got to hang in his dressing room and stuff like that. So you already had your starstruck moment.
Absolutely.
With James.
Yeah. Now, I certainly had, you know, I had a respect. I knew enough about because if my brother tells me there's something in this guy, Prince, that I'm convinced, you know, could be, you know, that you'll get something out of working for this musician. And I'll take my brother at his word, because although my brother does not play an instrument, my brother has some of the most acute musical instincts of anyone I've ever known. If you were to ever talk to my brother about music and didn't know that he didn't play an instrument, you would probably assume that he did, because he can speak to the music in a manner that sounds like he's a musician, you know. So when Alan tells me this is what this guy is about, whether or not his music is something that you want to sit and listen to or whatever, but you need to know this guy. And basically on that, I said, all right, you know.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I enjoyed the music. I liked the music that we did. More importantly, and I enjoyed doing the session with him. Obviously, more importantly, he liked what I was able to give to the music. And, you know, the other thing is just because Prince had heard something of me on a cassette that, you know, he decided, okay, I like this, bring him in here. Yeah. That's no guarantee that once you actually get in a room with the guy, that it necessarily is going to work out.
Well, do you think like him going, oh, you know, I can give you a cassette and you can have like a day, you know, to think and to listen to it. Do you think that was a test to kind of be like, okay, I'm going to say this to him, and if he does it, well, then he's behind me,
right?
You know, but then you're like, no, I'm here, I'm ready to do it. Let's go. And he's like, okay, this guy is the guy, you know, kind of a one step like further. Okay, let's see what we got, you know, kind of thing. Or
absolutely, I think that was very much of a part of it. Now, but the fact is that I didn't know him well enough to even consider it. So I don't remember that I sat and thought, oh, is he giving me a test? No, it really was just, and you're right, he actually might have been. But my answer was just said, no, man, I'm here. You know, let's do this. And
that would have been on brand for him to do that, but you didn't. You really didn't care one way or the other. You're like, oh, you know, man, I know what I'm doing.
Well, people are people, and you know, like I talked to, you know, I talk to Kurt. We talk on the phone all the time. Sometimes I'll call him and he'll be like, dude, it's 3 a.m. What are you doing? No, I'm just kidding. But like, no, but I'll call him and we talk about this whole, you know, musicianship and different artists and the lifestyle of artists and the fact that, you know, people are just people. They're the same people. The fandom thing gets really kind of annoying. You know, I mean, you can be a fan, but like, I think there's a reason why Marty Bragg and Jelly Bean Johnson, they're not just going to let, you know, Kurt or anybody else just come into their life, into their house, you know. And this is kind of going a little off topic, but I mean, you know, there is people out there, like even with Morris Day in the time when we met Morris Day, and you get to know these iconic legends of their songbook and history and lifestyles in their brain. You know, it's like being able to talk to you and listen and hear, you know, all of the history that you have and you're speaking right now. that you're telling us. I mean, it's just crazy to be here and to talk to you about it, or to even hear you. And so what I'm saying is that do you think when someone goes up to you and knows what you've done in your work, you kind of do you get worried that they're a fan and might go crazy? Or do you just kind of take in consideration that, oh, it's the music, but it's also me? Or, I know there's a lot of people there, like Paul, he doesn't like fans out in the background. Uh-oh.
I think we lost. Hang on. He'll try to come back on. No, because I have no time limit. It's a paid account. I'm gonna pause it.